We do that regularly. We'll keep going.
The concern is I have never been able to attend one of these
This is your first.
because I'm a retired nurse. There's no way I could leave work to attend these during hours that you have them. And so this is one of the first that I've been able to attend.
Glad to finally work.
But I had to retire to make it work.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've done Saturday afternoons. Very few people have shown up for that.
Because you don't get public
Yeah,
announcements.
where would I have?
This meeting.
It's amazing that you made it.
This meeting was announced yesterday at 2 p.m.
Do it. You know, you deal with security issues as well.
Yet how many people received an invitation then?
I have no idea. I have staff that does that.
Look at the amount of people that are here, sir.
Well, welcome this morning. Thank you. We're glad to have you here. And those that, pardon? I see signals going on here. Help me out with the signals. We're glad to be here at the airport. Have a 11:50. Good morning. 11:50 loading time at the airport. So it's an opportunity on the way to do this coffee. Feel free to have some coffee back there. I've had enough of my coffee this morning. I'd join you with it as well. Give you an up-to-date on what's taking place in Washington, and the House will be finishing its first 100 days of activity. Democrats are taking their planning conference retreat this weekend, and so there's been a real rush to get some bills out of committee and to do some with regular order. Regular order means that, like Civics 101, bill is introduced, it's sent to a committee, the committee has hearings on it, subcommittee or full committee, amendments are allowed and offered, then it goes to the floor of the House, goes through the process there of debate, voting, and then sent to the Senate. We've had relatively few bills that have come out of committee through regular order process. Last Wednesday and Thursday in the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has the largest purview of any committee, we had our first markup in the first 100 days. And in those 2 days, we went through 19 hours of markup on 14 bills, all of which were debated to some degree. Amendments were offered. The majority of bills were simply passed on a party line vote, and we'll go to the floor now. The plan is, according to Nancy Pelosi, that they have those bills to point to as something that's been accomplished. So when I look at the successes in the first 3 months, and this may sound cynical, it's not. It's true, what's going on. We've embraced socialism. Though we've attempted to get the Green New Deal up for a vote several times in several ways, so far the Democrat leadership has blocked us from bringing that up for a vote. We tried to do that in a committee hearing last week, Energy and Commerce, with an amendment putting the Green New Deal in one of the bills, but it was blocked by saying it was non-germane, even though it was dealing with an environmental issue. We've enabled anti-Semitism by refusing to call it out and pass resolutions in either the House or Senate that specifically refers to anti-Semitism. And ultimately, after a lot of pressure, a resolution was passed and sent to the Senate that just simply called out anything phobia, whatever. We couldn't call out anti-Semitism. Nothing else was being put forward as anti. But Representative Omar and Rashida Tlaib from Michigan carried the day in stopping their leadership from allowing anything to be put forward on anti-Semitism. We've abided by infanticide. Numerous calls have been made to bring out a resolution that simply says, it's all it says, that a baby born as a result of a botched abortion will be given the same care, exact same care you give to any baby after birth. That's all this bill said in both the House and the Senate. And last week, 190 plus House members, including a couple Democrats, signed on to a discharge motion. And hopefully before the end of this week, we'll have 218 votes to bring that bill directly from committee and do what ought to be expected in this country in saying that a human being, this isn't an abortion before birth, this is a baby who's laying there having been born alive. And I met one lady last week who was a result of a botched abortion, had cerebral palsy, but she was there to testify in committee that her life has value and that babies, at very least, who are born after an abortion, a botched abortion, should be treated as any baby.
They are. Sir, they are.
Well, you tell that to the governor of Virginia. You tell that to multiple others who have had their lives taken after abortion, have been left to die. It's happened sadly too much in this country, and that's why we're doing what we're doing.
Not true.
We can believe Planned Parenthood, or we can choose to believe the truth. And the truth is, that's happening in this country, and it's barbaric.
Not true.
We violated the First Amendment. Why do I say that? In H.R. 1, the first 10 bills are generally, during a session, are given to the majority party's most important legislative efforts. And H.R. 1 in the last Congress was given to our tax reform and tax cut bill. It was our key piece of legislation. This one, under Nancy Pelosi's speakership, H.R. 1 was a so-called elections reform bill. What it's done is further move people from actual election responsibility. And it's given now, for any contribution under $200, it's matched 1 to 3 by the government, or excuse me, 3 to 1 by the government. Hence, your tax dollars very possibly could be paying for someone from the other party to run for office. Plus,
Not true. Those are fines levied on people who are abusing the campaign finance laws.
so you're saying that it's good to have corporate money now, even more so, into politics.
That's
Because
not
that's
their
where it's
money.
taken
That's
from
not their money anymore.
corporate dollars.
They've been fined.
They've been fined, so we're using more corporate dollars in our political effort. Bottom line is, it took more control away from free speech. It even put legislation saying you can only say certain things under campaign processes. And ultimately, if you don't follow what the government says in speaking out in campaign, you'll be fined. Now, that is not free elections or free speech. We've infringed on the Second Amendment in numerous ways with 2 bills that have no chance of passing. No chance of passing the Senate or being signed by the President, that offer background checks that we already have. But more importantly, offers background checks only to law-abiding citizens. Will never touch the illegal. Who's getting a gun will continue to get a gun and will use it illegally. There is a Second Amendment. We have a constitution in this country that ought to be amended if there's a problem with it. If it can't be amended because there isn't the support to do that, we stick with our Constitution.
Well, while you're on the subject of guns, do you think there is a workable way in this country with the current climate and the access to guns that we do have? Is there any way to try to get out ahead of the school shootings? Is it a mental health issue? Is it we need people to pay more attention to those around us? Speak up when you see something going on? Because I don't really see us ever limiting access to guns. And even if you did, there's so many of them out there. People are going to be able to get a hold of them. So it seems to me that the issue is more, how do you identify people that are at risk for causing these kinds of injuries?
Glad you bring that up, and that's why in several pieces of legislation this last term, we passed this additional dollars for mental health, research, and care. In 21st Century Cures, we put significant mental health funding there to address those concerns. We passed legislation that takes a real effort, bite at dealing with the school shootings, the church shootings, and all the rest, giving more training dollars, more dollars to schools to enhance their security, and by their own choice. Not every school will need metal detectors.
Right.
Some just simply need to be able to lock all their doors and have a system in place where you have to be announced to come in. Others will need law enforcement agents on the campus. But the schools will make those decisions. So funding was put back toward states and the local school districts to be able to do those things. But in the end, the laws that we have in place right now, that if followed and carried out, especially in our courts, coming down hard on anyone who violates any law relative to firearms, that'll have the greatest impact on stopping what's taking place. And yes, when you hear something, say something, some of these school shooters had made plenty of statements beforehand.
I'm sorry, what did you say would have the biggest impact?
Pardon?
You just said something that had the biggest impact in my mind or somewhere
The
else.
laws.
The laws, carrying out, following the laws that we have and using them. Having our judges throw the book at, so to speak, of the law when somebody abuses the firearm laws. When a person is caught with a gun who has no license, who has no permit to carry, etc., use the law. Make an example of these people. Those are things that we can do. And yet when we see the cities with the largest amount of law in place, anti-gun laws, like Chicago, like Detroit, like Washington, D.C., we also see the greatest illegal use of guns. Chicago, the place of my birth, the first 23 years of my life, right, is not a safe place to be. And yet they have the most restrictive gun laws in the world. My son and daughter-in-law and grandkids who live in the suburbs of Chicago have restrictive gun laws on them, but they live in fear of people who will use it. And yet, that's a gun-free zone.
You can write as many laws as you want, but I think the value of human life and the morals have been removed from the system. We've taken God out, we've taken the Bible out of schools. We used to bring guns to school when I was a kid, and that was only 30-some years ago. Nobody was shooting up the schools. Every boy had a knife in their pocket. Nobody was killing anybody then. It's the morals. That you can write 50 million, not you in particular, but you can, it's the morals. There's no morals. Nobody's going to church. No, there's no morals left. I can take that car out there and run over 1 million people. Are you going to ban my car? I mean, that's asinine to think. Somebody's got to pick that gun up and kill somebody. The morals, there's no God in the school. My kids are being indoctrinated. They're being told how to think. Then you got the media telling everybody how to think. As a woman who, I want to be able to defend myself with a gun. Every man in this room can overpower me. The only equalizer for me as a woman is a gun. And I don't know how you deal with those people there. I don't know how you can go to that place in D.C. and deal with the most asinine human beings on this planet. They want to take away everything, and they have everything. How asinine is that? I'm sorry, I don't know how you deal with it.
Well, fortunately, there are a lot of good people there too, but there are those that just don't think common sense. And you're right. You're absolutely right. And we've seen the morals of this country go away from what we at least considered traditional values. You just look at the foundational documents of our country.
They were perfectly fine up until the last 4 years when
Fortunately, the Constitution is still there. It's still based on those traditional values. And as we've gone away from that, when you think of abortion, this country has committed murder on over 60 million
60 million
innocents.
babies.
Innocents that are separate from their mother. There's no DNA that conjoins with their mother. That's a human being under the protection and growth, nurturing of that mother until that little innocent leaves the womb. And they would say, well, until they become viable, they're not a real human being. Well, my youngest 2-year-old granddaughter is not viable to live on her own. You could throw her loose on the streets right now and she would not survive.
But that's not the case. These are severe cases of encephalopathy, different diseases where fetus's brain hasn't developed.
All 60 million?
60 million.
60 million.
That's so different than the figures that were
All
talked
60
about on
million have
NPR.
been aborted since Roe v. Wade was handed down. This is a scourge, and when you have the devaluation of life on our most innocents, why should we not think that someone's going to go out on the street and decide, I don't like the way you're driving, I'm going to pull out a gun and shoot you. Or I'm going to go into church because I don't like your religion, and I'm going to shoot you up. Or I've decided you've cyber bullied me in my school, and so I'm going to come in and take you off. And I'm going to make a point of this. You're absolutely right.
It's an agenda, too.
But it's time for the majority in this country, I think, that aren't that way, on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, to stand up.
I want my country back.
Well, it's worth a fight, and that's why I'm glad to be there. So, let me give one more point. We've defended illegal immigration in these first 100 days as well, overwhelmingly, blocking any effort of the president. Now, the media have finally decided that it is true. There is a crisis down there. There's a crisis, humanitarian and otherwise. And you have 1 in 3 young girls that are coming across the border. 1 in 3 have been raped or sexually assaulted before they come here. More and more of them are coming sick and have to be medically treated, taking time away from the efforts of the Homeland Security people and Border Protection people that are supposed to be doing the job of securing those borders. And thankfully, Congress was unable to override the president's emergency order. And so walls are being built now, and walls are being reconstructed and refurbished, so that hopefully we will say to the rest of the world, give us your tired and poor who come legally, who come with a desire to be Americans and enjoy the American ideal, but don't come illegally. If you want to come to a nation that is great because we have laws and a constitution that we abide by, and you'll be treated as justly as anybody else, then don't have your first act of coming here to be coming illegally. That's how we've always been up until just modern history. And it's time we had a president that finally stood up and said no. And that's Republicans and Democrat presidents who have backed away from doing what was necessary to make sure that our laws are carried out. Anyway, that's the first 100 days. So let's go to some questions.
Sir,
Yes.
those talking points you just said are exactly the ones you repeated before. Are they your words?
They're my words.
Other Republican congressmen have said the exact
Oh,
same.
and that's
talking-
because we all agree that this is what's happening.
But I find it strange that the exact same words in the same order.
What's the matter with that? Just because
There's nothing
That's
wrong
what
with
our
crafting a
nation's
message.
facing.
Truth-
Nothing's
truth is
changed
truth.
in the last time.
and you don't think Nancy Pelosi has talking points that all their members use as well? I'd be pleased
Well, I
to
would
know
just love
that
you
the
to-
rest of the Republicans are using my words.
I would love you to admit that those are talking points that were given to you.
They're talking points that I've lived.
Okay.
Let's not be bitter. This is
I'm not
America.
bitter.
We can disagree.
I'm not bitter. I'm just making comments.
Further comments and questions?
And nothing's changed. I mean, it's the same agenda. Nothing's changed.
Same agenda. What's concerned so much is that there's a pre-existing condition Thankfully, Republicans want pre-existing conditions covered. And we have legislation that does that, did that, continues. But there is a pre-existing condition in Congress right now. It's called Trump derangement syndrome. It's covered. It's covered. And that's what's going on. And as we are making it very clear what the leadership in the House and Senate, and I consider Chuck Schumer the leader there as well, he's able to stop anything from happening by requiring a cloture vote, because he knows the Republicans don't have 60 votes to move anything. So that's why they can stop even having a bill brought up to deal with the Green New Deal. If AOC and others are so proud of the Green New Deal, let's bring it up for debate. And they won't do it. And so now that we put out points consistently across this country, we have to do it in meetings like this, we have to do it in our own radio interviews. We don't get the help from the media. So we have to make sure that it gets out specifically and clearly. They don't like it. Yes, sir.
What do you see moving forward? Are we going to be in a gridlock situation, or is this, waiting on the next election cycle to see if we can turn a few more seats, or what do you see realistically being able to be accomplished on some of these issues?
We'll find probably some accomplishment dealing with drug issues, opioid heroin use. We'll probably find some ability to work together on some labor and educational issues. They're relatively minor. I've said all along that as a result of being fairly effective this last term and working with Democrats and bipartisan issues, I was selected as the #1 most effective legislator of our entire Republican Michigan delegation. Debbie Dingell was the most effective legislator from her delegation. And why? Because we found places we could work together. Where we didn't agree, we smiled at each other and said, we'll see you at the end of the fence on another issue. And we can do those. But it's going to be small stuff.
Okay, so none of these big ticket items like the immigration reform and some of these other gridlock.
Now, we may get something done on certain worker visa reforms. We may get something done on that because those issues come in Democrat and Republican districts with agricultural, with construction, with hospitality industry, tourism, those type of things. We may get something done there. Most of the stuff that we're going to get done will be done by executive order, or the president using the funds that's given to each department in the way that he intends to use them best. But infrastructure improvement, roads, bridges, I find it difficult to think we're going to get much done there, because that would be a big win for President Trump. And if it can be a win for Trump, you're not going to get the support from Nancy Pelosi and her conference. So it'll be smaller stuff that we'll deal with. We won't see a full appropriations budget passed. Again, it will be continuing resolutions, omnibuses, those type of things. And that's a shame. It has to be that way. I'm glad that we got the full funding for the for the military in the last 2 years. But there's going to be pushback there as well. There are some key issues we need to deal with, making the tax cuts permanent that have impacted this country well. 82% of all taxpayers experienced positive outcome from those tax cuts. But individual tax cuts and small business tax cuts are only good for 5 years. That means 4 more years. We had hoped this term to go because it wouldn't require reconciliation to get it through, to get those permanent, just like corporate tax cuts. It's debatable, we'll get that. So it'll be little stuff. We'll keep picking away at it. I'm committed to doing that, and we'll do our best. Yes?
I didn't vote for Obama. I didn't vote for Trump. How do you feel about Trump's use of executive order, and specifically if the next president is a far-left Democrat, I'm guessing, or socialist, whatever? How do you feel about them using executive order to the same extent that Trump does?
Well, Trump hasn't used it as much as Obama yet,
That's why I said. I didn't
as
vote
much
for
as Obama yet.
I didn't vote for Obama. either,
It's
so.
totally legal.
I know it's legal,
And
but
the
how do you feel about,
What he's done so far, I've appreciated greatly,
okay.
especially on the immigration issue. I want our border secured. Now, by not securing the border, we're having,
But that border issues aside, I'm just talking about in general, using executive order, or executive,
that really is the most major executive order he's done. Congressional Review Acts we gave him from the House, which allowed him to do some major regulatory reform. And that is another legal right and opportunity for the president.
I understand it's legal, but my question is, how are you going to feel about the next?
It depends. There may be executive orders that a liberal would do that I could support.
Has there ever been an executive order that a liberal has done that you've supported? Then if you, because there's thousands of them, I guess.
There's lots of them.
But has
There's been a good number of the ones that, for instance, that Obama did, that we didn't push back against.
Okay.
We didn't take a vote to override. I'd have to
But
go
those
back.
were probably ticky-tack, small ones.
Well, DACA wasn't.
Did you push back on that
I
one?
pushed back on that one.
Okay, so you didn't support that one.
I did not support that one.
So you look at them individually then for the next one?
You have to.
would basically say that, let's say that Biden was in, I don't know, that he's acting like a king with executive orders. You would never say that. You look at it case by case.
Case by case.
Fair enough.
That's a separation of powers. And when they use the powers that they have, in this case, Congress is given to presidents to use, and sometimes you really have to in order to keep things within your department, your executive responsibilities moving the right way.
Don't you feel like that takes power away from you guys? in
Only if
Congress?
we let it happen. Only if we let it
Well, it
happen.
seems like that's what's happening right now. I mean, you
Well, I
said
don't think
earlier
so.
that Trump's
'Cause
going to have to do a lot of this stuff by executive order,
Yeah.
and you didn't seem to have a problem with that. That takes away you're our direct representative.
No,
Well, would you
if I,
say
let me
that-
just answer that. If I support it,
Then you're supporting
I've supported it. I've supported the process. The tools that we have, it's not either or. It can be both at times.
Can you override, in my knowledge here, can Congress override an executive order?
Yes,
You can.
we tried to do that.
Yeah,
Congress
is
tried
it-
to do
is it
that.
Two-thirds?
It's 2/3. Congress tried to do that with the border wall funding.
But isn't it true also that a lot of the use of executive order is because there's no bipartisan support for things? Or unless you have the supermajority and you can just push through your agenda, it just seems like in the last several administrations, it's basically gridlock. Whatever one side wants to do, if they don't own both houses, they can't do it.
Yeah.
So in order to get, if this is something that's near and dear to them, it's the only way they're gonna get it done. Because you don't have, doesn't seem to be consensus, certainly on anything major. You know, it's just almost impossible to get a consensus working. Like it seemed to be maybe 20, 30 years ago, they could get big stuff done. And, maybe because it was, quote, good of the country, that people could put their personal issues aside. But it doesn't seem like that's the case anymore.
We got big stuff done in the last 2 years.
You're right.
We got big stuff done in the last 2 years.
Well, you had a supermajority, though. You
No, we
had
didn't.
Well, you have both houses.
Yeah, we didn't have the Senate. Why do I say that? Because it takes 60 votes to get a bill up for consideration.
Right.
And so most of it was blocked, and the way we got things through was by using reconciliation, which didn't require a cloture vote in the Senate. But that meant we had to keep some things off the table that didn't relate specifically to the rules of cloture or of reconciliation. So that's why the tax cuts for individuals and small businesses weren't able to be put in there. So we have things that were left out. We got big things done, still nonetheless. And there's been plenty of times in our past history where we've had totally split government. We even had a civil war that took place.
No, I know, and yet things didn't.
And one thing we didn't have, that this makes this seem more evident of split, we didn't have social media. We didn't have 24-hour talk and cable.
Yep.
We had none of that. You had to wait for sometimes days to hear what actually was going on.
everybody watch the
But it's
nightly
a
news.
propaganda machine still.
And so right now we have it, and that's making it more difficult. But our governmental system was meant to be, just read the writings of the framers and founders in the Federalist Papers, it was meant to be very messy. Especially the federal government. It wasn't supposed to get much done at all. We've taken more control.
Talk about bringing guns to work, and you're never standing there with their muskets.
I mean, the federal government was supposed to be subservient to the states.
Yeah.
That was what the 10th Amendment is all
When
about.
can we take our government back?
Well, it's up to the people. The people keep electing the people that keep doing this to you.
When the
Can I be as blunt as saying that?
Yeah, you're right.
Can I be as blunt as saying that? When people complain about the government, they get the government they voted for or choose not to vote for.
You're right.
That's how it works. There was no way that I established the fact that I'm going to be congressman from the 7th district, and whether you like it or not, I'm there. I've had to go through elections to get that, and I lost my first re-election. They sent me home for 2 years. And then they said, oops, we made a mistake. We had a guy that came in and did everything that we didn't want. And so they said, you can have another chance, take him out. And that's the way it's supposed to work. But our governmental system, especially federal government, is supposed to be extremely messy. You've been to my town halls and heard me talk about Lynn Jondal, former Representative Lynn Jondal, Democrat from East Lansing. He and I served together. We're on the rubber chicken circuit a lot because both of us were ministers in our past. He's a liberal Democrat, I'm a conservative Republican. We were good friends. But he gave the final, he gave the speech for the first term-limited legislative class, and I was in it, he was in it. And his speech was entitled, "The Beauty of the Messiness of Democracy." And the gist of his message, and I still have it, I've quoted from it many times since 1998 when he gave that speech. It was, "Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, go forth and declare the messiness of democracy, because in its messiness is freedom." And the freedom is the fact that you can't get things done quickly, otherwise you would do some bad things quickly. And it's better to do nothing than do something that would hurt us. And that's what's happened. We've done changes, I think, that go against everything that government wanted. And we're seeing it done with the talk about ending stuff like the electoral college. Framers debated that, said, we want Manchester to have just as much say as Detroit. The only way we can do that is say that you all have your vote, but you elect electors, ultimately, they'll even it all out. Otherwise, you might as well just all live in Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York City.
How's that working?
That's who would elect it. And right now, we see forces out there led by George Soros, who wants to break down this country to try to change those things that made us very unique in the world. And so, no, it's supposed to be messy, but we hear more about it now. It's tweeted right away. It's on Facebook. It's on cable. And so you hear it, it sounds ugly. But if you had a chance to meet the majority of my Republican and Democrat colleagues, you would like them. The ones that get all the airtime, that are out there right now, yeah, there's some concerns. When I hear Rashida Tlaib from Michigan say the things that she says, and unwilling to even meet with us, when I offer the opportunity to meet, well, then I know there's a problem. But the majority aren't that way.
Besides voting, what can we do to change things, to make a difference going forward? What, as citizens, can we do?
Well, I think a good thing to do is a number of things. One, town hall meeting like this, invite your friends. I don't know how many thousands of emails, etc., that we send out. I leave that to my staff. But I don't come to a meeting like this, have the smallest group that I can possibly have. That's not my purpose. You can invite people, you can begin talking about it. You can let people know that there are people that think like them, that are out there, because we're feeling like, as a conservative, we're all alone.
Not all of us are
Not all of us.
conservative.
Not all of us, sir.
I'm saying that,
You-
because we feel that the liberals get all of the coverage right now,
They
to the
own
point,
media.
to the
They
point,
own
to the
media.
point now
No.
to the point now that they're willing to say publicly, I'm a Democrat socialist. When did you ever think that you would hear citizens of this country serving in government saying that they are socialists?
Social Security is socialist. Medicare is socialist. Medicaid is
But it's
socialist.
all propped up by capitalism. That's the.
I'm glad you
the
mentioned
underlying.
that. Yeah, those of us that wish we never had Social Security and could have done the things that free market does and saved our own resources, and would have had a better outcome than Social Security has for us. And now I'm tasked with saving Social Security and keeping the promise of Medicare as well, and living on Medicare myself and not liking it.
So
I'm
do you
glad you
think
mentioned
that the healthcare act passed years ago, is that same applicable to Congress members?
That is applicable to congresspersons and staff.
The same Obamacare that we.
Obamacare, the same garbage. The same garbage.
It works for me. It
I'm glad it
has.
works for you. The majority of people it doesn't work for.
Millions
But there are
of people
people
it's
that it
worked
works for.
27 million people on Medicare suspension.
The ones it works for are on Medicaid and Medicaid expansion, you're right. And the more we expand Medicaid, the more cost it's going to be to the entire taxpayer to carry on that system, as opposed to getting a healthcare system that actually works and gives people choices. One size fits all. Most of the Medicare expansions have melted down already. Most of the states that had Medicare expansions have melted down. And that's a fact as well.
Then why do so many of the nations of the world have universal health coverage and it works for them?
But they have capitalist systems that support.
No, that's not the case at all. They don't have a capitalist system. That's why the British teeth look the way they look. That's why people come from Canada, if they have cancer or heart condition,
Or
come to the
need a knee
United States.
replacement, they come here,
They come here.
because they're on an 8-month waiting list.
They're not
And
waiting.
an argument about Europe, the waiting list, how many people are dying in
No,
Europe right now.
no.
I would really like to speak to this healthcare issue because I am retired from nursing for 41 years. I worked at St. Joe's. I can tell you, I worked in surgery. There are not Canadians bombarding our system to get here. They really are not. I saw it once or twice in 40 years. Now,
That's your experience.
that is my
That's not the
experience.
experience of the hundreds of Canadians.
And they
We've
come
had-
here because they want it done a little bit quicker, all right? Or they want a specific surgeon who is here in the US. I've also worked with residents from Canada who can't get wait to practice in that system because their patients are not distraught about how to pay for their health care, and they can prescribe them the care they need. So when we think that Canadians are bombarding our system, it has not been my experience working at a large institution that is readily available to them. They are not bombarding the system. So,
As a nurse at U of M for over 20 years, I'm seeing all the foreigners come in and everybody's on Medicaid. Everybody. I mean, I'm
No, that's a
saying
different
over
issue than Canadians
75%
not liking
of my
our system.
patients that come in to deliver
Sure.
babies are all Medicaid. I mean, and it's all foreigners, and they actually told me how they do it too. There's videos in the Middle East and down below the border. They're all coming in, free riding the system, and my taxes are going up.
Well, I
I'm
think
getting tired.
the key question is, how do we make our system work better?
yes.
And frankly, the Affordable Care Act has not helped that to work.
It was a beginning, unfortunately. Really.
What we need to do is what we passed in the House and sent to the Senate. Sadly, the Democrats and John McCain stopped it. It was a patient-centered approach that gave each of us the opportunity to, in consultation with our own doctor, our medical care provider, to decide what we needed best. I didn't need contraceptive care. I didn't need gynecological care in my policy.
But your daughters have.
Good, they can make that choice. My
It's
daughter can make that
collective.
choice.
We
And
are
so,
all
I'm
healthy
not a
until we
collective.
get sick.
I'm not a collective. I'm in a free country. I do not want to be in a collective. I want to be able to choose what I need myself. I want my daughter to choose what she needs. And then I want insurance companies to compete for our business to provide the best coverage at the best cost. And that's what we offered. And sadly, it was stopped before it could get to the president for signing. A patient-centered, private sector approach to healthcare that has competition. The competition in this country has made us what we are. And that's what I'd like to see. And so now we have to kind of fix, replace parts of the Affordable Care Act to we finally extricate ourselves from a socialist system that has not worked for the majority of people.
Do you work for media? Are you a
No.
reporter? Oh.
No, I'm a
No,
constituent.
so you got it right there.
I'm a constituent. I live in Lima Township.
And it's always good to hear the other side. It's very appreciative, you know.
Yes, we are not invisible.
Right.
Question for you, Second Amendment question. I am a member of law enforcement. I have a wife who's a teacher, and so very concerned because I get intel on things that normal people don't. I'm trying to come up with a consistent position on the Second Amendment for my daughters to explain to them where I am. And the way that I look at it, and I want to get your opinion, is there's a continuum of, there's a range of weapons, if you call it, from a fist to a nuclear weapon. And as individuals, we all have to kind of choose where on that continuum that we will not allow civilians to have a weapon. And I've come up with my position where I think it's a reasonable position. I want to know where your position is. Now, the thing is, I can ask a liberal on the far left, and at least they will be consistent. I don't agree with them, but they'll be consistent. They'll say nothing, no guns. They'll say just nothing, no guns, nothing that fires a projectile, maybe. I cannot get a straight answer from the far right on where they would, on that continuum, not allow a citizen to own X. You can own everything up to X, but not X in past. Where are you on that?
Any firearm that is legal at this time should be allowed to a citizen.
Okay.
So when you talk about we can't own automatics, whether I agree or disagree with that,
Well, I'm asking you what you...
whether I agree or disagree makes no difference on that. We can't own automatics.
No, but I'd
So
like
a
to
bump
know
stock,
this.
for instance, that makes a gun basically an automatic, I think that should be outlawed
Okay.
if you're going to be consistent.
Okay.
But I personally think the First Amendment, or the Second Amendment, was put in place at a time when the citizens were given the right in Constitution, under the Bill of Rights, second only to a right to free speech and religion.
Or freedom from. But my question
You
is...
don't have freedom from religion or speech.
No. First Amendment allows you to have freedom from religion. Freedom. You don't have to choose.
Oh, yeah.
But
But that's a
anyway,
religion.
That's a different thing.
That's your religion.
So, actually,
No,
it's not. But
the Second Amendment was put in place to allow us to have anything that the military could have, or a government could have, or a law enforcement agency could have.
Okay.
Now, there's common sense about it.
Okay.
We're not going to let someone have a nuclear weapon.
Okay, so, all right, so that's good, because now at least I've pinned you down to no nuclear.
Sure.
So now as we work our way down, where are you personally?
I want to be able to protect myself against anyone and anything.
Okay.
And if I need to fight the government, I want to have the capability of having an automatic weapon, but I can't have that now.
Okay, so.
It's against the law. Until that's changed, and it won't be.
Okay,
We
so-
can't have an automatic.
Okay, so personally, you would say that automatic weapons are, you think that automatic weapons should be legal?
I think so.
Okay, all right, so that at
For-
least gets in kind of a gray area.
For legal citizens.
Okay, yeah, I understand that, yeah.
I won't use my automatic illegally.
Right, okay, so,
Because the key is the person. It's not the gun.
mhm.
It's not the weapon. It's not the knife. It's not the baseball bat. It's not the car.
You can kill with anything.
You kill
Yeah.
with
Well,
anything.
Yeah.
I understand that the weapon is a tool.
I'm a strict Second Amendment person. I believe that we have the right to keep and bear arms. It doesn't define which arms, but there's common sense. It's also propriety, there's also cost.
So with your common sense, using common sense then, where would the line be that you would, I haven't actually heard anything besides nuclear weapons, where's your personal line where you would say, now this is not okay for a law-abiding legal citizen to own?
I don't have any.
There is no, okay. All right, at least that's consistent.
And the fortunate thing about me, you'll never have to worry about me using it illegally. I'll use it to protect my family, myself. I'll use it for sporting. I'll use it for hunting. And I'll use it if necessary to defend myself against a runaway government.
So, chemical weapons,
Let's not get absurd.
well, that's what I need though.
Let's
It
not get absurd.
it has to be somewhere on that line.
Let's not get absurd. You're a law enforcement guy, right?
Yes, sir.
And you think rationally.
I try.
I hope
Yes, I do.
the members of the law enforcement I know think rationally, except the handful that we read about in the papers.
Sure.
So, no.
Right.
The Second Amendment says
Right, I know, I'm very familiar with what it says.
you have the right
I'm
to keep
just
and bear
trying,
arms.
I'm just trying to get a sense, and I'm trying to be consistent with, like I said, with my girls. I have a point, where I can say, no, anything beyond this, I'm just trying to figure out where your point is. Of course, you don't think that law-abiding citizens should, be able to use chemical weapons, or let's say, I don't know, bombs or whatever. Maybe you do.
Chemical weapons aren't defined as arms.
Okay,
We're talking about firearms.
okay. That's a good point.
I would tell your daughters, you have a right as an American citizen to have any firearm that you can have legally.
Okay, so Second Amendment would only cover firearms in your...
That's how they were defined.
Okay.
Back then, they weren't even thinking about it.
Well, they weren't thinking about automatic weapons either.
No, but they're thinking about having equal weapons to the military.
But our military has chemical weapons and
But that's not
bombs
firearms.
and...
That's not firearms. I think let's get back to common sense too.
Yeah, but if you go back to the...
Then we have to have a plane so I can have a bomb.
No, but if you go back to, your argument is that the Second Amendment says equal to the government. Well, that's a very important...
That was a firearm.
premise. At the
Instead of having
time,
a
it was a firearm. So,
Instead of having a blunderbuss or a musket, you'd have a rifle. And then they got repeating rifles. And you move those out. I think the common sense
We have time for about one more question.
I know you gotta leave.
Sir, so last week President Trump said that his father was born in Germany, which is not true. And in the past, you have said that your relatives, your grandparents and father, have come from Sweden. The public records show that your father was born in the U.S., in Illinois.
And you can thank Stephen Myers for doing that research, and someday I'll be able to thank him because my statement was made on the fact that that's what I believed. That's what I had stated in front of my mother, who never disabused me of that belief. And I never did the research like Stephen Myers, who spends his time checking on every word I say, and went back to 1920 census. And now I have that information, so I need to thank him and say I know more about my family's history than I ever knew before.
Good.
But my statement was made not to lie, but was based upon the fact that that's what I believe because of what my family had let me believe.
Good, so we're clear.
We're all in the same boat. I don't know anything about my family.
We're clear.
And in fact, I probably won't do any more research about that at all. But the issue was for the rest of you, the issue the rest of you need to know about, we were talking about the issue of immigration. I'm a product of immigration. Now I know because of what Stephen Myers did and going back to the 1920 census, now I know my grandmother came over from Sweden, which I didn't lie about that, came over from Sweden in 1889 with my grandfather. My father wasn't born until later on in the United States. I I know that. But I can still say the main truth that I was putting out is I'm an immigrant, result of immigration. I understand that. But my ancestors came over legally through Ellis Island. They signed the guest book. They came over with a trade that they could add to our country. They increased the impact of positive on our country by them coming. That was the emphasis. It wasn't the issue of whether my father, just because he was either born here after my grandmother and grandfather came or was born before, that didn't make any difference. The family came over legally. So if an individual wants to continue stalking every word that I say and trying to find where there might be something he would call a lie, let him do it. But that wasn't a lie. That was based upon the truth that I understood. And a mother who had taught me not to lie, who sat in rooms multiple times and heard me say that.
As a nurse, the health crisis coming down the pipes, the GMOs and all the crap we're being fed, is there anything we can do to fight these GMOs? I mean, the big companies are pushing their agenda. We wouldn't need Obamacare if we didn't have such poor quality food. What can we do to fight the GMOs? Europe's already doing it.
Well, I tell you what, let's be careful about just putting GMO in one broad brush. We do genetic modification, and it's the reason why we feed the world. We find the peanut, the production of peanut. That was genetic modification that went on there. We have corn now that's resistant to a number of things which cause us not to have to use as much herbicides. So some of it's good. We have to be careful. We have regulatory agencies that are supposed to be doing the studies and research on it, and they're doing a pretty good job. Our food is safe here in this country. We have life expectancy that's continues to grow, except for the opioid issue that's cut back now, and that's not because of GMOs. So there are some things we need to keep doing research on and find out.
For all of the requiring meds to stay alive. I mean, 100 years ago, our ancestors, they didn't need Obamacare. They were healthy. It just seems like this food is garbage.
Well, they died earlier.
They
in life.
died a lot younger.
They died younger.
But still, you know.
Yeah, no, I think we need to keep watching it. But I tell you, our agricultural industry has done an amazing job of feeding the world. And most of the stuff they're doing right now, and they do, no-till to all sorts of other things. But again, when we get into a hysteria about 3 letters, GMO, there's GMO, there's GMO. We want to make sure that our regulatory agencies are studying in such a way that we know the bad GMOs and get rid of that, and then allow other things to be able to give us a better crop, less herbicides, less stuff we have to put in the soil that runs off into our streams. Now we're dealing, and rightfully so, with PFAS, PFAS issues. And then back to fire suppressant issues that saved a lot of lives. But now we find out that stuff, while it saved a lot of lives, can cause problems. So we need to find other things to do it. But I'd hate to live in countries like where my daughter, son-in-law, and 2 granddaughters live, Uganda, my entire life, and experience all that doesn't work there, as opposed to living here in the greatest, freest country on the face of this earth that has produced things that enable other countries only to dream about what it would be like to be an American citizen. And so let's not throw the baby out with bathwater. Let's make sure we do the research, the medical research, the care. Oh, they're doing it. And guys like Francis Collins leading the National Institutes of Health, amazing work that they're doing.
Thanks for coming.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for being here. We'll see
Please
you at the next one.
Please have one after work.
Okay.
Please.
We'll do what we think is best to reach the people.
How about what the people want? Well, what do you think?